Hello, I'm David Van Zummeren, and welcome to a message on the book of Exodus, the second book of the Bible. I'm working my way through each book of the Bible, giving you a big picture overview of each book. This is called a Bible survey. My intent is to give you a big picture that helps you put all the big pieces of the Bible together. So as you're reading the Bible, hopefully on a daily basis, you get into a section that you might find difficult, hopefully having a big context of what the Bible is, where things are at, different stories, different places to look at, hoping that those difficult sections will become easier and you'll be able to apply what you're reading into your daily life. So if you want a bigger in-depth picture on what a Bible survey is, first message in the series was not on Genesis, it was what to expect in the Bible survey. So, Exodus, let's get into it. There are two pieces of information that I want to give you on each of the books of the Bible, and that is who wrote it and when. And I give you the information in that order because, as you will find, I've said it, but you'll discover it on yourself through this Bible survey journey that we're going on, that who and when are both topics of debate for almost every single book in the Bible. And generally speaking, the when follows the who. So if you think that Moses wrote Genesis and Exodus, then the dates that there's written will be in a certain time period. If you think it is a conglomeration of other authors, dates can definitely vary quite a bit. So, as with Genesis, Exodus, we believe, or at least I believe, and I will move forward with the assumption that Moses wrote it. Okay? And in fact, he wrote the whole Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible. Like I said last week, the Pentateuch, in its origin, as it was originally written, it was one book. It wasn't separated into 5 books. So, author, they're going to say is Moses. Now, this week, I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into the when, though. I touched on it briefly last week. But like who the authors are, there's several different theories as to when when Exodus was written, specifically when it was put down to paper. And it is tied to a certain extent of the dates of the material that is contained within Exodus. So we're going to look at 2 different theories, very cleverly named as the late date and the early date. Okay, so if we take a look at either one of these theories, it is actually tied to the pharaohs of Egypt. Okay, so if we look at the late date, meaning later in since the beginning of time, so closer to us actually. A little confusing, I know, but the late date puts Seti the first as the pharaoh who oppressed the Israelites. He ruled Egypt from 1304 to 1290 BC. And the pharaoh that is discussed in the Exodus story, that is Ramses II, and he ruled 1290 to 1224. So if we take those 2 pharaohs, it puts the Exodus around 1290 and then Israel going into Canaan and taking over around 1250. Now, how do we get to those dates? What's the supporting material behind it? And we will take a look at in Exodus 1:11. It says, so they put slave masters over them to oppress them with forced labor, and they built Pithom and Ramses as store cities for Pharaoh. So they're taking this and they're linking Ramses here with Ramses II. Now, in opposition with, you want to believe the other theory, the early theory, you could easily say there could have been an earlier pharaoh named Ramses as well as the first, and that's who the city was named after. But then we look also, some supporting evidence is in archaeology data in the land of Canaan. And it shows that around 1250, there was a lot of battles, a lot of people movement back and forth, and could definitely be argued that that was the Israelites moving into Canaan and taking over. It could also be argued that it was just wars that were happening in the land, or it could have happened during the time of the judges, people invading Canaan as there as well at that time. So that's the late date. Now we get to the early date. And in the early date theory, it has the Pharaoh of oppression as Thutmose III, and he ruled 1504 to 1450 BC. And then the Pharaoh of the Exodus is Amenhotep II, ruling 1450 to 1424. And yes, I am not good at pronouncing Egyptian names, among many, many other things, as you've noticed, but bear with me, please. So given these two pharaohs, we could place the Exodus around 1440 and then the conquest of Canaan around 1400. 1 Kings 6:1. In the 480th year after the Israelites came out of Egypt, in the 4th year of Solomon's reign over Israel, in the month of Ziv, the 2nd month, he began to build the temple of the Lord. So this gives us a time. So this puts the Exodus around 1446 if we work our way backwards from the time of Solomon building the temple. The early date also gives us sufficient time for the judges to occur. Now, it's generally believed that judges lasted between 300 and 400 years. And we can look at Judges 11 and 26. Where it says, for 300 years, Israel occupied Heshbon, Aroer, the surrounding settlements, and all the towns along the Arnon. Why didn't you retake them during that time? Okay, so two different theories on when, and again, that is around when the material of Exodus took place, not necessarily when it was written. It does give us a deadline of when Exodus was completed. So at the end of Exodus, it then goes into, we know Exodus had to be written prior to Israel crossing the river into Canaan. So with the late theory, that would be around 1250 BC, and with the early theory, that'd be around 1400 as the latest dates that Moses would have written it down. Unfortunately, we know that Moses didn't make it across the river into the land of Canaan. So why was Exodus written? What is the part? Why does Exodus exist? So we'll take a look at the section of the Bible that it's in. The PowerPoint here, and Exodus is with the first 5 books, again with the Pentateuch, and that falls into the foundational section of the Old Testament. Now you might be saying, Dave, there's history in Exodus and Genesis, and there's also instructional material in these books as well, and you'd be absolutely right. These sections are meant to be broad categories, so although they do contain historical and instructional, they mostly provide the foundation for the Society for Israel and what God outlines, as we'll find in later here in Exodus. He'll outline how the Israel should govern themselves and act, and how they take care of disputes, and also settling feuds in between each other and other nations. And Exodus also shows us how God fulfills his promise to Abraham that he made in Genesis 15, We look in verses 12 through 16. This is the promise that God made to Abram. As the sun was setting, Abram fell into a deep sleep, and a thick and dreadful darkness came over him. Then the Lord said to him, "Know for certain that for 400 years your descendants will be strangers in a country not their own, and that they will be enslaved and mistreated there. But I will punish the nation they serve as slaves, and afterward they will come out with great possessions. You, however, will go to your ancestors in peace and be buried at a good old age. In the fourth generation, your descendants will come back here, for the sin of the Amorites has not yet rejected its full measure." But in Exodus, we see this come to fruition. Now let's open the Exodus, and in the first chapter, the first paragraph, there's no groans allowed. Okay, I understand that it looks like a genealogy, but it's only one paragraph long. I think we can muscle through it. Okay, so this talks about how the first part of Exodus outlines how Israel prospered, even after Joseph and his generation passed away. And unfortunately, there was an event that happened that did not work out that great for the Israelites, and that was a change in leadership. A new Pharaoh took over in Egypt, and he had no idea of Joseph or the Israelites or anything like that. He didn't have the history with the Israelites. Instead, they started to not be too happy with the Israelites, as we see in Exodus 1, chapter 1, verses 9 and 10. The Pharaoh said, "Look," he said to his people, "the Israelites have become far too numerous for us. Come, we must deal shrewdly with them, or they will become even more numerous, and if war breaks out, we'll join our enemies, fight against us, and leave the country." So the Pharaoh thought, we need to crack down on these Israelites and oppress them. And well, that plan backfired badly for them. In verse 12, we see, "But the more they, the Israelites, were oppressed, the more they multiplied and spread. So the Egyptians came to dread the Israelites." Now, it could have been a moment of pause in Egypt, and the Pharaoh could have taken a deep breath and said, well, maybe I should accept the Israelites. Maybe I should do something else. That's not what he did. He doubled down. It was, we see in verse 19, we see the response in verse 19. So what happened was Pharaoh decided to double down, and not just to oppress the Israelites, but to actually start to kill them. And he told the midwives that when they go and help the Israelites deliver their babies, that if it is a male baby, the male baby needs to be killed immediately. Luckily for Israel, the midwives honored the Lord, and we see what happened in Exodus 1:19. Says the midwives answered Pharaoh, "Hebrew women are not like Egyptian women. They are vigorous and give birth before the midwives even arrive." So this is the backdrop to the story of Moses. Moses was born during this time when male Israelites were to be killed as they were born. Now, Moses' mom hid Moses for 3 months. She got to a point where she knew she was not going to be able to hide him indefinitely, that someone would discover him, which would mean he would die, and most likely she would die as well for hiding him in the first place. So at 3 months of age, Moses' mom took him down to the Nile River and hid him in some reeds, hoping that an Egyptian would find him. And one did. The Pharaoh's daughter stumbled upon Moses, and he needed somebody to nurse Moses because she couldn't nurse a newborn baby. And they went to, the Pharaoh's daughter had her servants go get an Egyptian woman to nurse Moses. And who did that person find? Moses' mom. So Moses' mom nursed Moses until he was at the age to be weaned, and then he took him back to Pharaoh's daughter so he could be raised without fear of death. Now, when I was preparing for this message, I looked over this section of Exodus and started to scratch my head. Like, Moses is a pretty significant character in the Bible, and I think what Moses' mom did was pretty brave. I think she should be mentioned here, and she wasn't. I'm like, who is Moses' mother? I mean, for sure, she could not have been forgotten in history, right? And she wasn't. So, a few chapters further on, it actually tells us who Moses' mom is in Exodus 6:20. Amram married his father's sister, Jochebed, who bore him Aaron and Moses. Amram lived 137 years. So that is this week's trivia question answer for you, free of charge. You're welcome. Actually, there's probably a couple here. One, Jochebed is Moses' mother, and Amram lived for 137 years. So now we're getting into Moses. And Moses is called to lead God's people out of Egypt. Right? And he argues with God. He doesn't think that God made the right choice. I think this is the story of Moses is well known in Christian circles and outside of Christian circles. Hollywood made a movie about him several decades ago, and I remember growing up with this in my CCD classes. Right? I mean, we learn about Moses, the burning bush, and his battles with Pharaoh. But the interesting thing is, and one of the reasons that I really advocate reading of the Bible on a daily basis and studying it for yourself and not believing, definitely not the movies and pop culture. Most of that material is not very accurate. But even the accurate material still misses things. And if you're relying on what you learned in children's Sunday school, for me, many decades ago, memory is faulty. But we have to realize that the material for the children are age appropriate, right? So it's missing some facts to it, not just from a factual standpoint, but from a length standpoint. It's the story of Moses is a pretty long story and might be difficult for some of the younger kids to pay attention to. So, what am I getting at? I'm getting at Aaron, really, and how much he took part in the Exodus and in the talking with Pharaoh. But one of Moses's arguments to God was he couldn't talk to people. He wasn't comfortable talking to people. And finally, in the end, God relented and said, hey, you're my man. I don't make mistakes, but Aaron is ready for you. He will help you. He will help you talk with Pharaoh. And man, I'll admit it, I was an adult before it really dawned on me how much Aaron did in the Exodus. And this is after I probably read Exodus a couple times before the light clicked on, like, hey, this is not something that is taught in the popular culture. It's not known. So please read your Bible often and keep rereading it. But this will be a topic that comes up many more times in our Bible survey, as at least for me, growing up, I was taught certain biblical stories in a certain way that when I read them, they were a little bit different. So that's here. Aaron plays a big part in the Exodus as well. And talking about the Exodus, we get to the plagues. But right before we get to the plagues, let's talk about another character that is central in the Exodus, and that is Pharaoh. So if we look at Exodus 7:13, it says, "Yet Pharaoh's heart became hard, and he would not listen to them, just as the Lord had said. For me, this has always been a struggling verse and topic, Pharaoh's hardening heart. Like, it says that the Lord hardened his heart in some spots, and here it says that the Lord said that his heart would harden. And I struggle, especially when we're discussing topics like the free will. Like, did Pharaoh have a free will, or did God create him just to destroy him? Like, it's a really big rabbit hole. I don't want to get very deep into it. But look for it. I will definitely be doing a message on that someday. Okay, just not today. So, plagues. How many plagues were there? There were 10 plagues. And we're going to take a look at these. It's kind of interesting because the first 9 plagues happen in a cycle, in 3 different cycles. Okay, so the different ways that the plagues were announced to Pharaoh and Egypt. The first plague in each of the cycles was announced in the morning to Pharaoh. The second plague was announced before Pharaoh, didn't say what time. And then the third ones were just unannounced. So if we look at the first cycle, the first plague was blood. This is where Aaron took the staff and waved it over the water, turned all the water in Egypt to blood. But Pharaoh's magicians could do the same thing. So in my mind, okay, it's justified that Pharaoh's heart would harden at that point because the proof is his magicians can do the same thing. Now for the frogs, that's where the frogs come running out of the Nile, and they're so numerous that they're even in your bed. I mean, they're everywhere. You can't even step anywhere in Egypt without stepping on a frog. But again, Pharaoh's magicians did the same things. Makes sense, his heart would harden. Now the unannounced plague of the first cycle is gnats. And that's where it says the dust of Egypt became gnats. And that's when the magicians told Pharaoh, like, no, we can't do this. This is the finger of God working. Right? And now all the other plagues, the magicians have nothing to do with it. And this is also the last plague. The first cycle plagues happened to everybody in Egypt, including the Israelites. Right? The Israelites had to put up with blood in their water supply, not being able to drink water. They had to step on the frogs, and they had to deal with the gnats. But when we get to the second cycle, something changes. And in verse 22 and 23, it says, "But on that day I will deal differently with the land of Goshen, where my people live." That's where the Israelites settled. "No swarms of flies will be there, so that you will know that I, the Lord, am in this land. I will make a distinction between my people and your people. This sign will occur tomorrow." So this is where he starts to separate his people from the Egyptians, right? And then we see in the second cycle, it's the flies, the death of all the cattle in Egypt, and then all of the Egyptians being covered in boils. That does not sound like fun at all. Now, these 3, I would think that Pharaoh's heart wouldn't harden. He'd be like, what do I have to do to get these guys out of here? Right? But he continues to harden his heart. And then the third cycle, we see the plague of the hail, locusts, and darkness. I feel that that should be enough. Right? I think that Pharaoh should have capitulated at that point. Unfortunately, for a lot of Egyptians, he did not. We get into chapters 11 and 12, and that covers the last plague and then the first Passover. The 10th and the last plague is a truly devastating, horrible plague. And that's the death of the firstborn of Egypt. So that is by far the worst plague that has happened, that could definitely happen, and it's terrible. But in this, we also get the Passover and the festival of the unleavened bread. The Passover is how the angel of God identifies which household has got Israelites in there and which ones don't. So the Israelites had to go through the ceremony of the Passover, and the blood of the lamb is put on the doorway, and that means the angel of God flies over that and does not kill the firstborn. And interesting, so if we go to Exodus 12:14, talking about the Passover, it says, "This is a day you are to commemorate. For the generations to come, you shall celebrate as a festival to the Lord, a lasting ordinance." So should we be celebrating Passover today? I was a member of a congregation, and we celebrated all of the Old Testament festivals each year, and it was a lot of fun. Okay, but I have not done enough research on my own to give you a definitive answer, yes or no. So I'm going to approach it the same way that I approach it when people ask me, should I go to church every week? Do I need to? Like, what's the purpose? And I lay it out like this. Like, you can say you're married. You can go to the church. You can go down into the courthouse, sign the marriage certificate, get married to somebody, but then you move literally to the other side of the earth. You never see this person. You never make visits, trips to see each other. You don't write. You don't even FaceTime with them, right? You never talk to that person again. Technically, you're married, but what kind of relationship do you have? Not a good one, right? And I relate that the same to going to church on a weekly basis, right? We want to be with our Lord and Savior. We want to honor Him. We want to worship Him. We want to have the best relationship that we can possibly. And we do that by honoring Him, spending time with fellow Christians, and doing something like He clearly says He wants us to commemorate that this day forever. So maybe we should, right? Maybe not, because a lot of people argue against the Old Testament festivals because of the new covenant that Jesus established on the cross. Right? They say everything else is gone. We don't need to follow those rules. And that might be true. I'm not saying that if you go to church every week, or if you don't celebrate Passover, you do, you don't. If that, I don't believe that is going to affect your salvation. Right? Again, this is not an argument that's going to affect your salvation, right? But what does it do affect? It affects the quality of the relationship that you have, right? Just as if you're on the other side of the earth and you don't even FaceTime your spouse, you're not going to have a very good relationship with that spouse. So if you don't interact with God and His people, you're not going to have a very good relationship with them. So I would say celebrate Passover, and I would say go to church every week, because you want to have a wonderful relationship with your God. That's my answer. Okay. So in Exodus, in chapter 12, verse 31, it starts the story of the Exodus, of Israel actually leaving. This is when Pharaoh's like, hey, okay, enough is enough, leave, right? So the Israelites here have been hoping to leave Egypt for a long time, right? But now they have hours to prepare, and they have to rush so quickly. They don't even have time to put yeast into their dough, right? And in verse 17, we see that we get to the point, 13:17, we get to the point where they're at the Red Sea. So between the Pharaoh saying, leave Egypt, and the Israelites having to gather all of their materials, and then they also gather gold and silver and precious things from the Egyptians, because the Egyptians are like, leave, like everybody, all of Egypt, get out, right? To then traveling to the Red Sea, only then to be like, well, now where do we go? And you look back, and who do you see? You see Pharaoh's army coming to chase you down. Like, this is like, I think, huge roller coaster of emotions. Not quite sure what the heck's going on. But now we get to see Moses part the Red Seas and walk across on dry ground. And at this point, this period of the Bible, I often wonder, how are these people that are firsthand seeing these miraculous miracles, how when they get to the other side, it doesn't take them very long to lose faith in God? And I wonder, like, how can they be like, if I saw the Red Sea get parted and I walked across the Red Sea on dry land, I don't think I would ever doubt. But are we really any better than that? Like, we give God grief all the time. Have you ever groaned when the alarm went off and thought, maybe I go to the late service, or maybe I just don't go to the service at all? I can skip one weekend. The thought has passed through my mind for sure. So I'm not sure if we're any better, right? But anyways, it still irks me that they do that. So the next several chapters in Exodus covers some of the strife that the Israelites give to God, right? They complain about food, they complain about water. We get to chapter 20, we start talking about the Ten Commandments. Moses going up to Mount Sinai. And again, it just irks me because let's talk about the Ten Commandments. Chapters 20 through 31. This is the law section of Exodus. This is really what lends Exodus to be in the foundation section of the Bible. So it's three sections that it can be split up into three sections. Chapter 20 is the Ten Commandments. 21 through 23 is the judgments. These are social regulations for governing, including consequences for stealing, accidental damage, or death. And then in chapters 24 through 31, it's ordinances dealing with offerings for the tabernacles and regulating religious ceremonies. And then also then God talks about, tells Moses how to build the ark and the tabernacle and all the furniture in it. Now in chapter 32, again, just irritating part of the Bible for me, that the people of Israel, in a matter of days, a couple of weeks, I believe, they think that Moses is not coming back. I mean, they can see that he's still up on Mount Sinai with the thunder and the lightning. I would imagine they would think was God talking to Moses. And they convince Aaron to take over. And Aaron builds a golden calf. Now, God tells Moses, get down off this mountain. I'm going to wipe all these people out. Like I'm done. And I'm going to establish a nation through you. And Moses actually argues against him and says, you can't do that. You made a promise to Abraham. And what would people think if you brought all these people out here just to kill them? And God agrees, and Moses goes back down, but not everybody gets off scot-free. As we see in chapter 32, verses 26, 29. So he stood at the entrance to the camp and said, whoever is for the Lord, come to me. And all the Levites rallied to him. Then he said to them, this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Each man strap a sword to his side, go back and forth through the camp from one end to the other, each killing his brother and friend and neighbor. The Levites did as Moses commanded, and that day about 3,000 of the people died. Then Moses said, you have been set apart to the Lord today, for you were against your own sons and brothers, and he has blessed you this day. So there was a bit of cleaning a house there, where the people, and these people that they struck down were the people that really rebelled, led the rebellion against the Lord, and forced Aaron into building the golden calf. Now the rest of Exodus, there's a lot of other stories in their period of time in the desert. It really chronicles the actual building of the tabernacle and everything inside of it. So thank you for making it this far in the video. I apologize once again. I don't think I want to make the 15 to 20 minutes of each message as we go through the Bibles. maybe Jude, maybe some of the smaller books I'll get through pretty quickly. But anyways, please subscribe. And if you want to know when the next book comes out and the next message comes out, go ahead and hit the alarm button and you'll get notified. Also, I should have links here to the YouTube series, the Bible survey. And well, have a great day. God bless.